Okay, so to create the pillows, I'm just going to hide all of this, and I'm going to create a plane, and I'm just going to click and drag and draw it roughly around our pillow. I'm going to hit Alt X to make it X array, and I'm just going to press F4 to show edges, and I'm going to change both of these to 1 by right clicking on the dialog and add an edit poly, and then I can select this vert and just move it in, and I'm going to kind of trace over our pillow. So I can hold shift, I've selected that edge, I'm holding shift and I'm pulling that down, and what that's doing is extruding our plane. And again, I'm going to pull that in, and I'm going to connect these edges. Maybe pull that up a little bit, and then we can select all of these edges on the right hand side. So there I just selected and used Alt to deselect. You could select that face and hit loop, or you could just double click that face and it will select the loop. And then I'm going to hold shift and click and drag that all the way across. And again, select these two and add a bit of plumpness to these pillows. Now, a really useful tool in our edit poly is the cut, which we can find here. Now, you don't need to actually have any of the selections on to use cut, but you can, it's not a problem. And then with cut selected, what it will allow you to do is basically draw in edges. So that's really useful. Just make sure that when you're adding cuts that your cursor looks like this. If you select somewhere that isn't a vert or an edge, then it's going to create a vert in the middle of a poly, and you're going to end up with 5-sided polys, which we really want to avoid. Triangles are okay, quads are really what we're aiming for, and 5-sided polys should really be avoided. So using the cut tool, I'm just going to follow our edge along. And I've right clicked, and I'll do the same the other side. So if you right click, it's going to end the cut operation, and I'm going to select border. And what that does is select all of our edges, or you could call it a border. And I'm just going to bring that in a little bit to add some plumpness to our pillow. And holding shift, I'm just going to click and drag that in the Y. So back in the top view, we can unhide all and bring it all the way to that armrest. Now, taking a look at our reference image, if we go to the front view, we can see that that pillow aligns here with that seam, but it should actually align with the armrest, and that's to do with the perspective. So I'm just going to pull that over to the armrest. And still with edge selected, if we go to F3, we'll see better what we're doing. I'm just going to hold Alt and remove the selection of this side, and then holding shift, I can pull that out all the way to the back of the sofa, and then we can see we're creating that L shape. And now I'm going to select these 3 edges, holding Control, shift drag until they meet the cut that we made earlier. And vertex. Now there's a couple of things. I'm just going to isolate our pillow perspective view with P and then Z to zoom. So there are a couple of ways to weld this vert to here. What we could do is right click and target weld, and then you'd click our first vert and weld it to this one. And you can see target welds here as well. And another way you could do it is by selecting the two verts. You'll be able to see that two vertices are selected under selection. And if we go to weld, we can change the threshold. So basically anything within 0.1 centimeters will weld to each other. So we can see we had 45 verts and now there's only 44. So those two are welding together. And once you've set that threshold, you can always just hit weld here. So going back to edge, so let's do the same over this side. Shift drag those across. And let's just select, see if we select all of these verts, we've got 14 selected, but I mean this one isn't going to weld here because of the threshold. So if I go to the weld dialog and just turn that up, you can see that that's welded and that's welded. So we've welded two, but we really need a really high threshold to start welding those all together. So that's another quick way to weld. Select the edges again and shift drag these all the way over this time. And what we want to do is add another set of edges here. So I'm going to select that face and ring select, and again that will select all of our adjacent edges. So I'm going to want to add a connect, and we can actually use pinch and slide to position this. So I'm just using slide and I'm putting that where I want it. And now let's push these into position, select these verts and weld them. And let's add another set here. So ring select, connect. Okay. Shift and drag these across. Weld these guys. And this time I'm going to connect twice. Get rid of this slide and use pinch to push these out. And then I'm going to bring that across again. And I just want to pull that edge and also this inner edge outwards. And then I can select this lot and weld. Get these edges round. Something else that's worth knowing is I've just selected that border to quickly select both edges, and I'm using Alt. So we've got these three edges selected and these three. There's a tool called Bridge, which will allow you to bridge that gap, which is handy to know. And now I'm just gonna eyeball some of these edges. So if I select this inner poly, I can pull that out to kind of add some plumpness. Don't worry too much about how these polys are looking at the minute. We're going to add some more subdivs. So I'm just adding some kind of fatness to these objects. Alright, so you would have noticed that these objects are looking pretty hard. The edges are really straight and they're not smoothing together well, and this is because they have no smoothing groups on. So if we unisolate everything, we can see that these base objects look really smooth, and that's because they do have smoothing groups on. We can see that in this edit poly. If I select one of these faces, we can see it's got a smoothing group of 2. So if I go back to our pillow and I select all of our polys and change them to 1, we can now see that the polys have smoothed together. If we select these faces, for example, and give them a different smoothing group, we'll see that they smooth with each other, but not with the other smoothing group. So let's change that back to smoothing group 1. So I'm going to add some more edges to these pillows and to add some more plumpness. So I'm going to select all these edges and all of these and connect. I'm going to turn off the pinch and let's add 6 edges. I kind of just want them to be roughly equal sizes. And let's go in this direction. 6 looks right, and here we'll need less. So I'll put 2 in there. Now what I want to do is add something called a turbo smooth. So I'm going to type that in the modifier list and turn that on. And instantly you can see what that does. So turbo smooth smooths out geometry. And what I like about it is that we can add it in the stack. So we can turn it on and off, and we can also jump back to our edit poly and make some changes and jump back to our turbo smooth. So again, this non-destructive workflow is a really good way to go. So what I'd say is try and keep your model as low poly as possible. It's just simpler to model, and then at the end you can add this turbo smooth. There are some drawbacks to this turbo smooth modifier, and I'm just going to quickly show you what that is. I'll create this box and let's throw a turbo smooth on, and you'll see that it pretty much becomes a circle almost. Well, if I make that 50 by 50 by 50, it will become almost a circle, and the more iterations I add, the more it becomes a sphere. Sorry, I should have said sphere, not a circle. And this basically barely resembles the box. And this is because the turbo smooth subdivides the geometry whilst averaging out the angles. So the effect is going to end up rounding this box into a sphere, because the average distance between these edges is this middle. So if we put this Turbo Smooth onto 1, and let's throw a chamfer on between the two, you can see that we have created these edges. So now when it averages out the distance of these angles, it's going to stay as a cube. And it doesn't matter how many iterations we add, it's just going to get really heavy where our chamfer is. So if we turn that chamfer off, it becomes a sphere. So a good thing to keep in mind is when we add the Turbo Smooth, it's going to average out the distance between edges. Hence why the chamfer is important. So with that being said, if we unhide all and take a look at our reference, we do actually want some hard edges on the tops and bottoms. So we can jump back down into our edit poly. I'm just going to double click this top edge, hold control, double click this one. And here, let's isolate again. There is also a chamfer in here you can use, but the reason I like using the chamfer modifier is we can go back in and edit. So I'm going to add that here. And rather than uniform, where we can see it's kind of drooping down here, I'm going to change this to quad, and that's going to make all the edges into equal quads. And I'm going to put that on 0.5 for now and see what that does to our Turbo Smooth. And that's added more defined edge. And then we can actually turn up our Turbo Smooth again. And we've got quite a nice looking pillow. And again, what's great is if this is too defined here, for example, we can jump back into our edit poly and pull these back in. But what you'll want to remember is this edit poly was dictating to this chamfer what edges were to be chamfered. So if we go back down to the edit poly and go to edge and make sure we have these edges selected when we chamfer, we're going to have that nice edge.